What does the future hold for the world we live in? Known for his outstanding analysis and predictions for the future in areas such as politics, the military, and diplomacy, renowned futurist scholar Dr. George Friedman is here with us today. Also known as the 21st century Nostradamus, with a series of precise predictions, we'll get his view of the future that is ahead of us. 안녕하세요. Hello. It's great to have you here at YTN Studio.
Thank you for having me.
Do you get to visit Korea often?
Not often enough. This is my second time here, and it's very pleasant.
Well, your books, The Next 100 Years and The Next Decade, are very popular here in Korea. And what's quite interesting is your view on America, specifically looking at the U.S. policy towards Ukraine and the Islam State. Many believe that the U.S. power is declining. What is your opinion on that?
Well, ever since the Depression, world opinion is the U.S. power is declining. I remember during Vietnam, the U.S. power is declining. The U.S. has many engagements in the world because it's the only global power. And that means that many of them will encounter problems. But none of these problems threaten the viability of the United States or its power. If something happens in Ukraine, if something happens in Iraq, if something happens in Korea, the first question is, what is the United States going to do? This is what a global power is. And what makes the United States a global power is the massive size of its economy, the fact that it's a vast continent united, unlike anyone else, and finally that it has a naval power that spans the world. We can go anywhere and do many things, and that makes us very different from other countries.
And you believe that China will implode. What kind of reasons leads you to this possibility?
Well, for the same reason that Japan imploded. You can only grow that fast for so long. And in the case of China, the problem is that inflation has taken hold in China, so the Chinese goods are no longer competitive in the world. Chinese labor is more expensive than Mexican labor, for example, which is an enormous turnaround. And that means that Chinese capital is leaving China. They're buying hotels in New York rather than investing in China. So you see all the things in China that you saw in Japan, plus 1 billion impoverished people. So China is an inherently weak country that's now reaching the end of the cycle.
So in the case that China does implode, how can Korea prepare for such a situation?
Well, with great difficulty by itself. Secondly, when we use the word implode, we really have to talk about what we mean. China is not imploding because it's imposing a dictatorship on itself now, a dictatorship that's much tighter than it was, say, 10 years ago. And that may hold it together, but that holds other dangers. The problem of Korea is that it occupies a strategic location, and it has to have partners outside of the region. And frankly, the only partner it can have is the United States, because there's no other country in the world that can project power here. So the way you cope with this unstable, uncertain environment is to make certain that you are aligned with the only global power there is.
You also predicted that the Koreas will be unified in the next 10 to 20 years. Will the superpowers such as China, Japan, and the United States leave the Koreas to be unified?
Well, certainly the United States doesn't care. And Japan, in a sense, cares, but is not going to take action. The one to watch is China, because China uses North Korea as a tool to manipulate the United States and other countries. There's a crisis in China, a crisis blows up in North Korea, the Chinese have to help, and this goes on. So the answer is China may try to involve itself, but very frankly, the responsibility for the future of Korea is in the hands of Koreans. And what they want to do and how they do it, including North Koreans, is more definitive than what outside powers do.
Well, what kind of preparations do you think need to be made in order for the country to be prepared for unification?
Well, unification can take many ways. It could be an agreement. It could be a collapse. It could come planned. It could come as a surprise. It's very hard to prepare for the unexpected, but you know one thing that will happen, which is the South Koreans will help North Koreans when it comes. And whether it's planned or a surprise, South Korea has to be prepared financially and politically to take the role only it can take.
So what do you think Korea will look like in the future?
I think Korea is one of the most promising countries in the world. When I discuss the virtue of a relationship with the United States, I always point to South Korea, a country that 50 years ago was impoverished and today has the city of Seoul and sells products all over the world. I think that will continue. You have problems, declining population, you live in a dangerous neighborhood, but on the whole, the future is enormously bright for Korea.
Well, the future is very closely related to the present. What do you think are the strengths and weaknesses of the Korea of today?
Well, the greatest strength of Korea is the enormous efficiency of its economy, the education of its population, its flexibility. Its weakness is that to be prosperous, it has to have an economy larger than it can absorb domestically. And therefore, you must have a foreign policy. You must have a foreign policy not because it's a good idea or you should have one. Your life depends on your ability to sell your products. And that is not simply an economic issue, that's a political issue. And you have to address that.
And last but not least, have you tried Korean food?
Yes, I had some today, and it was absolutely delicious. My favorite dish is beef, and it was some of the best beef I've ever had in my life. And I also had a dessert that had pears in it, and in the pears there was sugar water. And I can't tell you what its name was, but it was wonderful.
Well, thank you very much. We look forward to your continued interest and expert advice on Korea, and we really appreciate you being here for this interview. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.